Hello everyone, I'm Casper Kuma and welcome to project number 3 of Casper Creates, and today we are making a plugin type Asacoco. The VTuber we're basing this project on is Kiryu Coco, who is a Hololive alumni. Kiryu Coco is a kid dragon who came to Japan from another world as a language exchange student, and she holds a deep interest in human culture. She's a dragon with a strict code of honor and keeps her human form through sheer force of willpower. Now this project is a little different from the others because the design for a plugin type Asacoco already exists. Coco has released a plush version of her tail, and she has shown a USB type tail on her streams in the past. However, you can't truly plug the plush tail into anything, and the USB tail only exists in PNG form, so I thought it'd be fun to make a functioning plugin type Asacoco. For the design, I'm basically just copying how the tail looks. This was a bit challenging, however, because they seem to have multiple different versions of her tail. In this picture on the Hololive website, the scales sometimes look like they come to a sharp point and overlap on top of one another, but in the picture right under that, it shows the scales more rounded off at the ends and separated. And in her 3D model, they picked a design that's kind of in between the two extremes. And then finally there's her actual design for Asacoco, and that looks entirely different. So for this project, I decided to follow the design for her 3D model. I chose this over the Asacoco design because the more detailed versions of her tail are much easier for me to model in Fusion 360, because the shapes are much more defined. Now, it was a bit difficult to find good pictures of her tail, so I decided to just use this picture of a shrimp for reference. This is because shrimp scales are surprisingly similar to her 3D model's design, so I wonder if they also based her tail off of a shrimp. Now, the main difference between Coco's USB Asacoco and mine is that hers has USB coming off of the tail with a cord. I thought this was a little bit unnecessary, so my USB is right next to the body. I figured the USB part could stand in for the plug-in part for when the flash drive is uncapped, and it's also probably easier to plug in this way. And having the cap allows you to alternate between having the tail look like her original Asacoco or the USB type. And with the design done, it's time to move on to 3D printing. I'm printing this on an FLSUN Super Racer in PLA filament. And once that's done printing, I remove all the supports from the print using pliers. And then I move on to sanding. I start with a Dremel with 100 grit sandpaper. I use this to quickly knock out all the layer lines. I'm being very careful to sand very lightly and keep the Dremel moving so that I don't accidentally melt the plastic or cut into the piece. And after that, I use a metal file to help smooth any spots that were hard to sand with the Dremel. I then sanded even more using a variety of sandpaper from grit 80 to 3000. I keep alternating between the Dremel, file, and sandpaper until the model is completely smooth. Next, I widen the hole that the flash drive will be going into using a Dremel with the cutting bit. This is because I want the flash drive to be able to slide right in. Currently it's just a tiny bit on the small side, so you'd have to take the tail apart to put the flash drive in. It's important that I'm able to keep the two halves together because it will allow me to get rid of that seam in the middle, and having the ability to insert the flash drive later will make the piece much easier to paint because I won't have to worry about accidentally damaging the flash drive. To glue the parts together, I'm using Gorilla Epoxy glue. And then I'm using some clamps to ensure that the two halves are securely attached. After it's dry, we move on to filling and priming. For the filler, I'm using Liquitex modeling paste. I apply this over the seams, and then after it's dry, I sand it smooth with sandpaper and a metal file. After that, I spray the model with Vallejo white primer. And it looks like the seams are still pretty visible, so I repeat the filling process again, except this time I'm using Bondo. Now there was a bit of a problem when I went to sand the Bondo. All the primer sanded right off. Usually I use Rusteolum filler primer and it never sands off the model like this, so I'm not sure if Vallejo primer is just not meant to be sanded or if it just didn't bond with the plastic yet, but oh well. After sanding it all off, I take the model outside and spray it with some filler primer. After the model is primed again, I'm still not happy with the seam, so I give the modeling paste one last shot at covering it all up. And once the model is finally seamless and smooth, I try spraying it again with the Vallejo primer. And this time it stays on the model. Yay! With the priming done, it's finally time to move on to painting. First, I start with the lighter color part of the tail. I use light purple airbrush paint mixed with a little bit of white paint, and I spray this all over the model. However, this is way more vibrant than Coco's tail actually is, so I'm going to have to tone it down quite a bit. So next I add a little bit of grey paint into the mix and spray the tail again. Then I move on to painting the scales. For this I'm using a mix of metallic purple, rose red, yellow, and black to give it that warm and darkish color, and I apply this to the scales on the tail and on the cap. Then I mask off the cap with masking tape and I spray the plug part with some silver paint. Now after that I tried to give the tail a bit more dimension by darkening the inner fold areas on the tail, but this ended up looking pretty terrible, so I repainted the entire tail over again. With the main color done, I move on to adding that little bit of goldish highlight that's on the edge of the scales. To do this, I tape off the model and spray it with a mix of bronze and gold paint. I then clean it up with a paintbrush and then add a little bit of gold to those smaller scales on the sides of the model. With that done, I still feel like the paint job's looking a little flat, so I add some magenta colored highlights running alongside the middle area of the scales. And then I paint the underbelly with some white highlights too. After that's done, I spray the entire thing with some Rusteolum lacquer, and this will seal the paint and give it a nice and glossy shine. With all that done, there's one final step, and that's adding the flash drive. First thing I do is sand away some of that paint that got inside of the hole, and then I just insert the flash drive into the tail and insert the cap inside of the, well, cap. And with that, the plugin type Asacoco is finally done. I think it looks really cool, and I like how it looks with or without the cap. And now I've also got the perfect place to store all my important documents. So I hope you liked my project. I think it turned out pretty cool. I do still need to work on my airbrushing skills though. Again, this is like the second time I've actually used this thing, so I'm still working on that. Hopefully next time I'll be able to get like those detailed areas without having to redo the entire paint job. But you know, we're learning. It's a process. Oh, and if you have a favorite VTuber, don't forget to tell me about them in the comments. You never know, I might look them up and then base the next project on them. The more variety of VTubers I can learn about, the more variety of projects we can have. But yeah, that's all for this one, so let me know what you think of the video down in the comments below, and I will see you in the next one. This is Casper Kuma, over and out.